The government has awarded public sector workers, including doctors, teachers and those in the armed forces, a pay rise of around 4%. But unions argue it's not enough and are warning of possible strike action.
Well, we're now joined by Armed Forces Minister Luke Pollard. The Armed Forces, of course, at one of the upper end of the scale of the agreed terms. Now, I'm sure everybody in their hearts feels like doctors, nurses and members of the armed forces deserve the pay. However, can we afford these inflation-busting pay rises? And we thought that this was going to be the end to potential strikes. And yet, even though there's a question mark over whether we can afford it, doctors, teachers are saying it's not enough.
Well, good morning. We can absolutely afford to value the people that work so hard in our public services. It's right that we're giving our armed forces another above inflation pay rise after the biggest pay rise in 20 years that this government gave them shortly after the general election last year. This comes after 14 years where the doctors, the nurses, the teachers, the prison officers, the soldiers and sailors in our public sector often receive below inflation pay rises or no pay rises at all. That in many cases a real terms pay cut. That's why we're valuing those people that work in our public sector, giving them a decent pay rise. And because of the way that we've been able to adjust some of the budgets, get our economy and public finances back on track, we can afford to give a good pay rise to those public sector workers without increasing taxes by making the adjustments within budgets to make sure that we're valuing our people, rewarding them appropriately, listening to the independent pay review bodies and making sure that we're supporting people during the cost of living difficulties.
Well, there was a lot in there, wasn't it? First of all, you know, teachers don't feel that they've been given something that makes them feel happy about their pay rises. Agreed was 2.8%, now up to 4%, but they're going to have to find the difference out of their school budget, which has already been cut and stretched. So that doesn't feel like particularly a reward. Doctors are saying the figure is derisory. And as I say, their emotion doesn't seem to be that it's going to be the end of strikes, so they feel rewarded because there's possible strike action still.
Well, I hope there will be no strike action because we're giving people an above inflation pay rise.
There won't be any strike action, don't we? We all hope that across the board. But why do you feel confident that they won't?
Well, I think the case that we're making as a government is that we're listening to the independent pay review bodies who come up with these pay figures independently. We are making sure that we're increasing pay above inflation, which helps people have more money in their pockets than they would otherwise do. Yeah. And we're moving on from those 14 years of austerity. Now, I think those are reasons where we can genuinely say thank you to those people who work across our public services, and that we can say yet again, here's the second year in a row, in only 10 months of being in office, 2 years worth of pay settlements where you're getting pay above inflation, so increasing the amount of money in your pocket in real terms.
I hear that message. However, the Treasury's only budgeted for 2.8% public sector pay rises. You've already raised taxes in some areas and we're having to look at spending as well. How are we going to pay for this?
Well, we've set out that because we've made changes to the mess of our public finances that we inherited after the general election, we've got the economy growing again, the fastest growth in the G7. Because of that, we're able to support these decent pay rises for those people who work in our public services, and we'll be able to do so from within existing departmental budgets.
OK, can we ask you about the winter fuel allowance? There's been a huge U-turn. It's been really embarrassing. One of our colleagues, Ed Balls, on his podcast described it as a politically a mistake and incredibly difficult to raise a threshold. And they said he says you now have to do a massive big U-turn. But the thing is, people at home now, and a lot of our audience will be going, well, OK, it's all well and good, you're doing a U-turn, but what's the detail? When will they know? I mean, winter's not that far away. They need to start planning. Are they going to have more money in their pocket? When are you actually going to make a proper decision and tell people where they stand and whether they can switch their heating on coming this winter?
I'm hoping for a bit more summer before we get to winter, but you're right that people want that certainty. And that's why at Prime Minister's Questions this week, Keir Starmer set out that he wants to see more pensioners receive the winter fuel allowance. And because of the way that our public finances are now getting back on track, because of the growth in our economy, that provides the opportunities to do that at a future fiscal event such as a budget. Now, I think it's vital we do that, but I think also, I don't think that millionaire pensioners should be getting the winter fuel allowance. I think where there is extra resources available because of the good management of our economy and finances, that should go to the people who really need it. That's why we protected the poorest pensioners by keeping winter fuel allowance for those on pension credit and encouraged more people to claim pension credit that they're entitled to if they're on low wages. It was right to do that, but it was also right that we kept a commitment to the triple lock, something that other parties are shedding at the moment, that will see pensioners on the state pension get just under £2,000 extra over the course of this Parliament, which is good news for them. And it's really important that we make the case and keep these under review at all times to make sure that we're supporting the people who really need it the most. And that's what the Prime Minister set out his ambition to do on Wednesday.
I'm going to ask you to make the case for something else now, which is more in your department. Sir Keir Starmer's signed a deal, hasn't he, to hand over sovereignty of the Chos Islands to Mauritius and then lease back the military base. Now, when you look at images of the Chos Islands, it looks like a dream holiday that people who are worrying about their bills could never afford to enjoy in Mauritius. So can you explain to our viewers why it's worth it for our national security to be paying Mauritius £101 million a year for 99 years for islands that we already before owned?
Yeah, Diego Garcia is probably the most valuable military installation that the United Kingdom has. Much of what it does there I'm not able to talk about, but what we can put in the public domain is it's vital, not just as a deep water naval port, as an air base, as a satellite communications hub. It is essential for the UK's national security and that of the United States. But the constitutional and the sovereignty, the uncertainty around it that has been there for decades was building to a point where our assessment was that the judgments that would be found against us would contribute to the base being inoperable, that we wouldn't be able to control the airspace around it or control the water space, that adversaries would be able to set up in the waters and the islands around it. Now, that is unacceptable to our national security because the first duty of any government is to keep our country safe. That's why, when it comes to the operation of the base, that was the first and foremost in our minds. This deal secures the future of that base for over a century. It means that we have full and unrestricted control over the water, over the airspace, over the electromagnetic spectrum that's vital for radars and communications. It is essential that we keep that base operational. That's what this deal does.
Luke Pollard, before we run out of time, I do need to ask you, you talk about national security and staying safe, and you'll know that having great relations with our strongest allies is crucial in any situation. And it's very worrying that we are losing our relationship with an ally like Israel. Yesterday, Benjamin Netanyahu has pretty much said Keir Starmer is on the side of Hamas. And he has said that Keir Starmer, Macron and Carney, who put out that joint statement earlier in the week and following the tragic murder of this young Jewish couple in America, but he accused Britain of being on the wrong side of history. What does that make you feel? And are we on the wrong side of history? Is Benjamin Netanyahu right?
No, I don't think he is right at this point at all. We've condemned thoroughly the murder of the Israeli diplomats in the United States, and we've also been clear that the best way of getting peace in the Middle East, to creating a secure Israel and a viable and secure Palestinian state, is for an immediate ceasefire, for the hostages to be released by Hamas immediately, and for there to be aid at scale gotten into Gaza, given to the people who desperately need it. Food, water and medical supplies. It's precisely that which is what the Prime Minister has been making the case for privately and now publicly, because that's the best thing for Israel, the Palestinians and the wider peace in the region.
Keir Starmer talked about strong action, though. He said the next step will be strong action. What does strong action look like? What does that mean?
Well, we are continuing the dialogue with Israel about what should happen next. We're also making the case clearly that the terrorists, Hamas, need to release the hostages immediately. It's all that effort that we're doing, both privately in the diplomatic space, but also publicly, because I think many of your viewers will see the scenes that have been broadcast from Gaza, the numbers of innocent people who are losing their lives, who are struggling and suffering so severely. That's the case we're making that says, look, the peace that Israel wants to achieve is best achieved with an immediate ceasefire, with getting aid in and making sure that international aid, humanitarian aid, water and food should never be used as a weapon of war. We've been very clear on that, but we are also clear that Israel has a right to defend itself, but that defence must be entirely consistent with international humanitarian law. Now, that's the argument we've been making consistently since those appalling terrorist attacks on the 7th of October. It's the one we'll continue to make because we want to see peace in the Middle East, and the best way of getting there is for the violence to stop straight away, the hostages to be released, and aid to be delivered.
Luke Pollard, Armed Forces Minister, thank you so much for joining us this morning.